there will be some sunshine too.
Coming up on Dan Wootton tonight, with Truss under fire and the Tory party facing annihilation, I return with my take on the establishment plot to overthrow yet another PM and the sinister repercussions for Britain. Joining me, an A-list squad of top newsmakers and commentators, including Nigel Farage, political firebrand Anne Widdecombe, and columnist extraordinaire Rod Liddell. Plus, my superstar panel, former Daily Star editor Dawn Neeson, entrepreneur and activist Adam Brooks, and broadcaster Ashley James will be on hand to break down the latest developments. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Tonight on Farage, Leaver Home Secretary Suella Braverman is out. Remainer Grant Shapps is in. I've been warning you for the last couple of days. This is the Hunt reshuffle. Is this a Remainer coup? We'll debate that. We'll also ask why. So many grandparents cannot get access to their grandchildren and what is to be done. And joining me on Talking Pints, a man who was part of the story that helped to bring Boris Johnson down, but then has been leading the campaign to bring him back. Yes, Alex Storey will join me for Talking Pints. But before all of that, let's get the news with Polly Middlehurst.
Nigel, thank you. Good evening to you. It's been a busy day in politics today. The former Transport Minister, Grant Shapps, has been made the Home Secretary following Suella Braverman's surprise resignation this afternoon. In a strongly worded resignation letter to the Prime Minister, Suella Braverman said she was resigning due to a mistake she had made earlier today when she sent an official document on migration policy from her personal email account, which she admitted breaks the ministerial code. But in an openly critical paragraph in her resignation letter, she also said she had serious concerns about the government's commitment to honouring manifesto pledges. In response, the Prime Minister says she accepts the resignation is important to uphold the ministerial code and cabinet confidentiality. Well, also today, the Prime Minister was telling the Commons she's completely committed to the triple lock on pensions. Liz Truss faced jeers from opposition MPs during Prime Minister's questions, as she said she was on the side of working people and promised to protect the most vulnerable. But the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, urged her to stand down, asking what the point was of a Prime Minister whose promises didn't last a week.
The only mandate she's ever had is from members opposite. It was a mandate built on fantasy economics, and it ended in disaster. The country's got nothing to show for it except the destruction of the economy and the implosion of the Tory party. I've got the list here. 45p tax cut, gone. Corporation tax cut, gone. 20p tax cut, gone. 2-year energy freeze, gone. Tax-free shopping, gone. Economic credibility, gone.
Well, in our other main story on GB News today, the deaths of 45 newborn babies could have been prevented, according to an inquiry which found serious failings at one of England's largest NHS trusts. After reviewing more than 200 cases dating back to 2009, experts concluded that poor care at East Kent Hospital's NHS Trust contributed to the babies' deaths. Some newborns were left with brain damage. The chief executive of East Kent Hospital's Tracy Fletcher admitted mistakes were made, and she apologised to the families affected.
I want to say sorry and apologise unreservedly for the harm and suffering that has been experienced by the women and babies who were within our care, together with their families, and as described in today's report. These families came to us expecting that we would care for them safely, and we failed them. We must now learn from and act on this report.
Tracy Fletcher. And lastly, charities are calling for benefits to be raised in line with inflation, which has returned to a 40-year high. Office for National Statistics figures show inflation rose to 10.1% in September. That's up from 9.9% on the previous month. Higher food prices were responsible for the increase. You're up to date on TV, online and on DAB+ radio. You're with GB News, the People's Channel, where now it's time for Farage.
Good evening. Well, don't say I didn't warn you over the course of the last couple of evenings. I told you something very extraordinary was going on. I suggested that it was a globalist coup, and this does not mean I've become a wild conspiracy theorist. It's just that. And please don't ask the question, how long can the Prime Minister last? She is completely and utterly irrelevant. Jeremy Hunt is now almost like a president, making all the big decisions. And the Hunt reshuffle, as predicted, has begun. And the first victim is, no surprise here, the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman. Well, she had to go, obviously. I mean, she believed that free trade deals with India didn't need open borders. She actually wanted, I mean, can you believe this, to stop the boats with all those Albanian criminals crossing the English Channel. But the worst sin of all, which couldn't be allowed, she wanted to leave the ECHR so we can make our own decisions on who stays in the country. Now, they've done for her with a technicality. They've said that she sent a sensitive document out to a colleague on a WhatsApp group on her own mobile phone. Sin of sins. As Dominic Cummings says, by the way, not that he's always gospel, but as Cummings says, government documents, including official and sensitive ones, are circulated by top officials via WhatsApp every single day. She was sending a document to a colleague in Parliament as a sounding board. She's gone, she's out, she's done. And in her resignation letter, she says something that I think is quite significant. She says, not only have we broken key pledges that were promised to our voters, but I have some serious concerns about the government's commitment to honouring manifesto commitments and in reducing overall migration. Now, gosh, you can't talk about things like this. No. You just tell this to the electorate every 4 or 5 years. You just lie to them. You never actually intend to do it. And that is what she's put her finger on. She doubts the commitment to stopping illegal immigration, especially the small boats in the Channel. So she's gone. The Remainer, the Brexiteer. Somebody actually who had real backbone and wanted to fight these issues that a big silent majority agree with. She's gone. And the joy out there from Care for Calais and all of these groups, well, if you want to go onto Twitter or onto TikTok, you can find it. Her replacement, well, of course, it's a globalist. Of course, it's a Remainer. Yes, it's Grant Shapps. Let's see his comments shortly after he got the job.
Except that the government has obviously had a very difficult period, as Jeremy Hunt said when he was appointed on Friday. That nonetheless means it's doubly important to ensure that we are doing absolutely everything in the basic areas. And Jeremy Hunt, I think, has done a great job of settling the issues relating to that mini-budget.
As Jeremy Hunt said, Jeremy Hunt's doing a great job. Liz Truss, not even mentioned. You get the point. Hunt is in control. Yes, the IMF wanted him. The German Chancellor wanted him. The American President wanted him. And you know what? All the criticism of reducing taxation, when the truth is wealthy British businessmen can now go to Portugal, Italy, France, huge tax competition going on all over Europe. No, they wanted Hunt in. And I'm asking you tonight whether you agree with me that this is a Remainer coup, because that is absolutely what I believe it is. Let me know your thoughts, Farage at gbnews.uk, or, of course, you can tweet me, Farage at GB News. Let's go to Westminster. Let's be joined by Darren McCaffrey, our political editor. Darren, I understand there's a vote going on right now, a Labour motion that wants to attempt to ban fracking. Let's start with that.
Yeah, and utter confusion and anger inside the Commons tonight. We were told, weren't we, earlier on today by the chief whips that essentially this would be a vote of confidence in the government. Well, looking at the size of the Conservative rebellion within the last hour or so, they seem, unbelievably, to have done another U-turn, because the essentially government minister in charge has said that this motion is now not a vote of confidence in the government, but asked whether, if Conservative MPs abstain or indeed vote against the government, whether they could lose the whip or not. Well, that's not entirely clear. We believe that there is chaos and confusion in the lobbies, because the vote is literally underway as we speak, about what Conservative MPs are meant or trying to do. Quite extraordinary. I know we use this word a lot, Nigel, but the idea that the government somehow have control of the Conservative Party, which is normally what governing parties do, Prime Ministers normally have control of the parties, is in no doubt completely in tatters this evening. I mean, a real sense of just the lack of authority and legitimacy that Liz Truss and indeed government ministers now have among the Tory backbenchers, that this has been allowed to continue. We're going to see the size of that rebellion in the next couple of minutes, but be in no doubt, I mean, the damage by the way this has been handled has already been done.
Well, I guess ultimately it will depend on whether Jeremy Hunt wants to frack or not, and I would think as part of the global community, he probably would rather we go on importing energy than producing our own. Darren, I tell you what is a mystery to me. As the One Nation Remainer wing tighten their grip on the party, what has happened to the hardline Eurosceptics? What has happened to those who believe in controlling our borders? They appear to be completely and utterly silent. Do they look and feel beaten?
Yeah, really interesting, isn't it? We heard from David Jones today, former Brexit minister, one of the most senior members of the ERG, trying to push Liz Truss on this idea about the Northern Ireland Protocol and the role the ECJ may well play in it. Warm words from the Prime Minister, but frankly no commitment. Steve Baker, someone who is, again, a big Brexiteer, but now a government minister, a Northern Ireland minister, must be said, tonight on the television insisting that Liz Truss was the only Prime Minister that they could essentially bank on. I mean, it is fascinating. I think to many degrees, the ERG is slightly split, those Brexiteers, on who precisely they want in Downing Street, because there is concern among them, if they get rid of Liz Truss, that Rishi Sunak could move into Downing Street, who certainly I don't think is viewed as an ERGer, if you like. But you look at where Liz Truss is tonight, Nigel, it's unbelievable in many ways. She's appointed Grant Shapps, the man she sacked only 6 weeks ago as Transport Secretary, as a Home Secretary. This is a man who spent the party conference season undermining the Prime Minister, who called on her to scrap that top rate of tax, who essentially said she had 10 days to sort it out or she'd be kicked out, who on Monday said that her chances of remaining Prime Minister were akin to threading the eye of a needle with the lights off. And now he's one of the most senior government ministers. It is a sign of desperation, I think, from Liz Truss. It is a sign, you're right, of the influence that Jeremy Hunt now has on this government.
Yeah.
And there are big questions for Conservative MPs. What is this government here to do with Liz Truss's policy agenda completely junked and with Jeremy Hunt effectively in charge? Is this what they want going forwards?
Astonishing, absolutely astonishing. Darren, thank you very much indeed. But joining me is Martin Clark, former editor of the Mail Online. Martin, you know, blink and you've missed it. The story keeps... I didn't know he was about to say that. No. I mean, I thought that the Conservative Party at last was committed to the idea we might start to produce some of our own energy, and it appears that even that has met with the rebellion. Where I disagree with all the commentators, they keep talking about Liz Truss, she's irrelevant now. I think Hunt is completely in charge.
Yeah, she's irrelevant. It doesn't matter. It makes no difference whether she goes tomorrow, next week, the week after. She's toast. But equally, I think Hunt's irrelevant. This government, government is putting it too kindly, it's this rabble that happened to occupy the government benches are clearly not fit for purposes of government. It doesn't matter whether there's an election in 6 to 8 weeks' time or in two years' time. The Tories, you know, who's going to bet on a new Tory government? There isn't going to be one. So it's not a question of, what are the Tories going to be in government? I think what the Tories need to start asking themselves now, quickly, is what are they going to be in opposition? What kind of opposition are they going to be? And because God knows we will need a strong opposition when you have a Labour government and the BBC in lockstep. That will be, a loving for the ages. And what role will the Tories play there?
How's it gone so wrong? I mean, an 80-seat majority. One of the first times they'd gone to the country with what seemed to me to be a genuinely Conservative manifesto. Do you think it's still the splits from Brexit that are playing out?
Well, I think that's one of the splits, but they run deeper than that. I think, to be brutal about it, a lot of Tory MPs aren't Tories. They've been just as happy in a Blair government, even maybe a Nick Clegg Lib Dem party. They're not Tories. And, this coalition has finally come apart at the seams. You've got 12, and it was, the problem was, what the policies that Liz Truss was trying to pursue originally, I guess they're good old-fashioned Tory policies, but you can't suddenly present good old-fashioned Tory policies after 12 years of telling people the exact opposite, of telling people that public spending will always go up. And there'll never be a price to pay when you pour away £400 billion on a pointless lockdown, which, as far as I can see, only achieved the ends of destroying the country's work ethic, teaching people that they didn't need to work or they could work when and wherever they wanted.
Especially if you're a civil servant, of course.
Yes. Well, even in the private sector, took millions of people out of the workplace. When you teach people that there are no consequences in their personal life for anything that happens.
So that reversal was too much to accept.
You have to spend years, laying track for that kind of thing, for educating people about why the consensus of the last 20 longer years is wrong. Yeah, I mean, you can't turn on a sixpence.
You make the point they will have to decide whether it's in 6 or 8 weeks or 2 years. And who knows when the next election's going to be. I mean, it seems to me if they get rid of this leader and appoint another one, the clamour for an election could be very great. But your big point, is they must decide what they're going to be in opposition. I think it's perfectly clear that the One Nation wing of the party are back completely in control. The Brexiteers appear to be routed, ageing in many cases. Sir Edward Lee, got up on Monday in the House of Commons and said, well, if we can't even cut taxes with a big Conservative majority, what is the point of the Conservative Party? And I have to say, that's a question that I've been asking. So if they go into opposition, and if they're going to continue the sort of Cameroon, SDP type agenda, what happens then?
Well, essentially, they're just Labour light. Again, what is the point of that? There must be, traditional Tory voters should be given a better choice between this shambles and the Labour Party.
Well, yeah.
And, currently...
You say shambles, news just reaching me.
Another...
New shambles? Yeah, new shambles. I said blink and you miss it.
I'm running out of
Wendy Morton, the chief whip, has just resigned. So they just descend into farce.
Presumably over the fracking.
Over the fracking, yeah. So is it possible? Two questions here. One, is it possible that a party can come along and replace the 200-year-old Conservative Party? And secondly, if we got PR, do you think Labour, if they win a big majority, will bother with PR?
No, of course they won't.
They won't, will they?
No, everyone's in favour of PR until they're in charge.
Yes.
And all of a sudden
Yes.
they're not in favour. No, this is going to, unfortunately, going to take years and years and years to unwind. The shape of the Tory party after the next election will largely depend on who survives. Which MPs hang on to their seats and what the complexion of the party is after the election. If most of the survivors tend to come from the ERG wing, then you're going to have a different Tory party. But, as you say, if the Tory party just becomes that Cameroonian Labour light, then what is the point? If they're not going to offer an alternative to the British people, then who will?
And I led a couple of insurgencies.
Nigel.
Well, I led a couple of insurgencies, quite successful insurgencies against the Conservative Party, and the net effect of what I did was to, yes, get that issue that nobody wanted to talk about onto the table and succeed in leaving the European Union. But the political effect of what I did was to help the Conservative Party win an 80-seat majority. What I wasn't able to do was to crack the first-past-the-post system. 4 million votes in 2015 and 1 seat. Is it possible they can be replaced, or do we have to hope that they suddenly become a Conservative Party again?
It depends how badly they lose. Yes, of course. If they lose badly and then don't form a coherent opposition, if they leave a gap in the political market, if you like, then yes, in time for the election after that, yes, another party could come along and displace them. But we're talking electoral cycles here, multiple electoral cycles before it shakes out.
We're looking perhaps into the 2030s.
Yes.
Which is a very depressing thought for many of our viewers and many of our listeners.
Especially for you and me.
Well, no, desperately so. Enough to drive a man to drink. Martin Clark, thank you very much indeed for coming in and joining us. Next, we're going to get off hard politics. We're going to talk about something that is affecting a couple of million grandparents in this country. They're not allowed access to their grandchildren. Why have we got this crisis? And is there anything that can be done? We'll examine that in just a moment.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB Newsday with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB Newsday and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
The country is at a crossroads. What do we really think about the highest tax burden since 1950? How does this impact local communities? Where does the national economic debate go from here? I'm going to start off in Deal in Kent this Thursday, the 20th of October. To give us your view on where this debate should go, go to gbnews.uk and join me on the People's Forum.
So, do you agree? Is this a Remainer coup? One viewer says it certainly looks like it. Kevin says if it is, the Conservative Party is finished at the next general election. I tell you what, I think they're finished already. Russell says, any more Remainers in this cabinet and Guy Verhofstadt will be Home Secretary. No, not him, anybody but him. Gosh, one thing I don't miss from not being in Brussels every week is him. Sarah says, yes, it's a coup on Brexit. That's my feeling. Darryl says, absolutely. And it's time you got back into politics, Nigel. No time to lose before these dangerous people finally destroy our country. Well, thank you very much for that personal advice. That is very, very good of you. Now, a report out overnight and being revealed exclusively on this programme, and I hope it does get much wider currency, and I think that it will. And it comes from the firm Lloyd Platt and Company. Vanessa Lloyd Platt joins me, and it's a poll about grandparents and the sheer number of grandparents in this country that do not have access to their grandchildren. Vanessa, what are the numbers involved here?
2 million that we know about. And why we're trying to turn it on its head and why we needed to do the survey to prove what we already knew was, why is this happening? And why we're turning it on its head is we're saying it should be the right of every grandchild in this country to have grandparents involved in their lives. We know that the grandparents bring security, psychological help, financial help. And what this survey revealed was that hundreds of thousands who had seen their grandchildren, had a close relationship with them, suddenly cut off. Why? Because of a row with a daughter-in-law or the partner of a son. And over 40% of the cases proved that was the case. So we, with GB News, who have been amazing, we want that there should be a reconciliation between these people, and we're appealing to daughter-in-laws everywhere and partners of sons. Pick up the phone to the grandparents, become reconciled. Doesn't matter who did what, just phone and resurrect.
But family bust-ups are pretty common, aren't they?
But now, even more so, with the divorce rates going through the roof, children, grandchildren need the grandparents to bring them that security. They're in turmoil. We know that children are suffering psychological problems. It's in everyday papers. Your news programme talks about children suffering all the time. And what was the enduring image during COVID? The grandchildren up against the windows,
the glass windows, yeah.
looking at the grandparents and vice versa.
Yeah.
So this isn't just about grandparents' rights, it's about grandchildren's rights. And the UN Convention on the Rights of a Child recommends that it should be the right of every child. So we've signed up to the convention, why aren't we doing it?
There must be cases where there are grandparents who are forbidden.
Yes.
From seeing grandchildren, where the grandparents could be disruptive, unruly, potentially violent, drunk, setting a very bad example. There must be cases where it's justified.
There are, but they are very rare. As a divorce lawyer, I can tell you that in my 40-something years of practice, I've only seen one such case. So it's very rare. What our report also revealed is that our esteemed police force, in 150,000 cases, were going up to grandparents and threatening them if they sent presents or cards to their grandchildren.
Well, the police have got nothing better to do. I mean, you must understand.
Well, of course.
Yeah.
But
that
it is a
incredible.
travesty.
You call for reconciliation, and I hear you very clearly, but you're also suggesting that maybe legislation's the answer.
Well, we drafted the Children's Act, or redrafted it. We put it before Parliament. We lobbied Parliament, and they were going to do something about it. Why we're doing it is to change the Children's Act so that the need for grandparents to apply for leave first and then get over that hurdle and apply to see their grandchildren should be wiped out. We're the only country virtually in the whole world that imposed that. I spoke with many, many lawyers and judges in America and all over the world, they can do it on a first appointment and weed out those cases that you are talking about. Okay. So why are we doing this? And are you going to help us with this campaign?
I must say, Vanessa Lloyd-Platt, 2 million is a figure. I'm amazed at that number. I really am. Let's go to a campaigner, a joint campaigner, Jasvinder Sangera. Jasvinder, when I hear that amendments to legislation, that changes to law are coming in, I do tend to react by saying, haven't we got enough laws already? But clearly, from what Vanessa's just said, Parliament isn't particularly interested.
Well, the keystone to justice is the belief that the legal system treats all fairly. Let's start there. In 2018, the government, then Justice Minister, said that they would consider the law. It got full parliamentary backing, and we haven't heard a thing. This isn't a new campaign. This is an old campaign. And the point here is that we are listening to people who are older. I've recently dealt with an 86-year-old woman, law-abiding citizen, who was asked to go to the police station for sending cards and gifts to her grandchildren that she became estranged from. She was asked to accept a caution and she mustn't do it again. I actually told her not to accept that. You know, we're talking about, today I heard about a mother whose only daughter has passed away. The husband has found a new partner and he's refusing to allow this woman to see the child. This is about the rights of children, and I've been looking at this for a year now, and I'll tell you, Nigel, in the last year, I have heard of 7 suicides of grandparents. What the Ministry of Justice will say is they've invested 5.4 million in mediation. What they have to remember is this: mediation is not mandatory. So grandparents have no alternative as a last resort but to look to the courts. And I'm sorry, the courts need to wake up because they are in denial of this issue.
Well, I mean, what you're talking here about, Jasvinder, then really, you're talking about significant psychological suffering, and you're arguing not just on behalf of the grandparents, but on behalf of the grandchildren as well.
Absolutely. I mean, how we treat our grandparents, grandchildren, actually, I mean, France enshrines it in law that grandparents should have that right. Other countries do. It is appalling. It's interesting, isn't it, how grandparents are recognised as kinship carers. So, you know, in social care, local authority will look to grandparents as a placement for grandchildren. However, we're not good enough to be enshrined in law. So the grown-ups can have their arguments. And let me just make the point that if there are safeguarding issues, absolutely understand that access should be denied, OK? We're not talking about that. We are talking about safe, loving relationships whereby overnight this young child thinks, what's happened to grandma, what's happened to grandpa, and just gone.
A very powerful case, and I'm very pleased we've given it a first airing on this programme, and I'm sure it'll get much more across the wider UK media. Thank you. Thank you both. Now, I'm going to go back to Westminster to join Darren McCaffrey, GB News' political editor. He's on College Green, and from the sounds of it, there have been some very, very dramatic developments in the last few minutes. Darren.
Yeah, we were talking about this at the top of the programme, weren't we, Nigel, about the confusion over that vote on fracking. Well, my word, if not discipline has broken down, it seems the whole system has broken down, with the most incredible tales of what happened in the voting lobbies within the last 30 minutes or so. We're told by Labour MPs and indeed by other witnesses who were there about how MPs were essentially physically forced into the voting lobby, some of them in tears to back the government, that there was lots of jostling, that Jacob Rees-Mogg was effectively shouting at MPs to follow the government whip. It's led Chris Bryant, the Labour MP, to call on the Speaker to look into all of this, suggesting MPs were bullied in the lobby, and that it goes against the behaviour of MPs. We heard from one who suggested that Therese Coffey, the Deputy Prime Minister, essentially manhandled another Conservative MP into backing the government. It seems like chaos. Frankly, it seems quite horrendous, actually, in many regards. What has the result of all of this been? Well, first of all, the government has managed to win that vote by 326 to 230, which means around 31 MPs, Conservative MPs, we reckon, voted against the government. But more importantly, it seems tonight that the Chief Whip and the Deputy Chief Whip have resigned from the government over this entire furore. Yes, you heard me right, another resignation, it seems, within government. The Chief Whip and the Deputy Chief Whip have resigned. Nigel, the Deputy Chief Whip, who's a guy called Craig Whitaker, has just come out of the lobby saying, and mind the language here, I am, a word beginning with F, an expletive, furious, and I don't give another word beginning with F, expletive, any more. That's the former now, it seems, Deputy Chief Whip. To say that this feels like the last days of Rome, that everything is falling apart, frankly, that's an understatement. It is falling apart.
Truly and utterly extraordinary, Darren. I do remember at the time of the Maastricht divisions 30 years ago, there was talk of people being gently pushed towards the lobby that the government preferred, and talk of, the whips potentially blackmailing people about perhaps some of their personal habits. But that sounds like a complete breakdown, the likes of which we've probably not seen since the 18th century, when, of course, MPs regularly were all drunk when they were in the House of Commons. Where do we go from here? What happens from here? I mean, aren't we in danger of the whole system falling into full public contempt?
I think we may really be already there in many regards, Nigel, in the sense that, even during the worst of the Brexit days, in terms of like the parliamentary logjam and the shaggy arguments we had, I mean, it was not at this stage of essential breakdown, particularly on the government's behalf. Where do we go from here? I think many Conservative MPs tonight will now be saying, like, this literally cannot go on. I mean, it's just not functioning as it is. Does that mean that we could see letters pile in tonight, tomorrow? Could Sir Graham Brady have to make a decision? Could those kind of Conservative MPs, the great and good of the party, like Sir Graham Brady, go to the Prime Minister and say the game is up effectively, you now face a vote of no confidence? I think the other thing, though, that Conservative MPs have to be very aware of, Tories voting for Christmas to a degree, because of what you just said, the entire undermining of the system, this will play into Labour's hands, and Labour's argument that there should now just be a general election, that effectively the Conservative Party has lost control of its own MPs, the government is not able to manage things, there's no sense that a change of leader might well remedy all of that, and that now is time for an election. But, we've talked about Liz Truss being in a very precarious situation repeatedly, a hell of a lot over the last couple of weeks, haven't we? Tonight really feels like she is on the edge. And that at any stage she could be pushed over. And we're going to have to wait and see. I'm not going to say it's definitely going to happen within the next 24 hours, but this is a really, really dangerous point for the Prime Minister. Apparently she was ashen face in the Commons as that vote was going throughout that chaos, throughout what seems like physical attempts to literally force MPs to back the government. Well, that is the level of discipline. Yeah. That's how low it is in the Conservative Party, it seems, at the moment.
Darren, thank you for that report. Shocking report, I think, to many of you at home, watching this, listening to this in your cars. Truly, genuinely shocking behaviour. And I make the point every night, this party isn't just not fit for purpose as a government of the country today. They've let us down in so many ways. They've broken so many promises. This party, and it may have existed for 200 years, it now needs to die, and it needs to be replaced by something fresh and new. It just isn't working. And I have to say, I think after today, I think the clamour for a general election is going to grow very quickly and very rapidly. I just think there's an overwhelming feeling, even among many who voted Conservative in 2019, that this lot deserve to be out of office and out of their ministerial salaries. That's my view. Tomorrow night, we're going to be with a live audience in Deal in Kent. It's going to be fascinating to see what those people in that constituency, it's got a 12,000 Conservative majority, but, remember, in 1997, Labour did win it. It's going to be fascinating to see what the good folk of Deal make of these shenanigans. One of the impacts of government policy, of course, has been that over 75,000 people have now crossed the English Channel. And much of the work in picking up those boats has, unfortunately, in my view, gone to the RNLI. They put out a video this morning very much defending their role in the English Channel and pointing out that they do save lives in bad weather. Have a look. So we know there are days when the lifeboats are called out, when the weather in the Channel is ghastly. We know that among the number, there are some young children and women. But what we do know, of course, is that 91% of those that come are men, the vast majority young. So the scenes you're seeing that are put out by the lifeboat are distressing scenes. And I know about this because, remember, those of you that have watched this programme for a bit, I myself was involved in the rescue of 2 young men, one of whom would have been dead certainly within the hour. But it's a hell of a dilemma for the lifeboats, and we see the Dungeness lifeboat here unloading people. What a dilemma it is. You join the lifeboat, you work as a volunteer. You do it because you want to help people in distress. You do it because you want to help, save lives at sea. And if it's a genuine call, I don't think the lifeboat crews mind going. But the vast majority of pickups in the English Channel are boats being picked up in very calm weather, in very safe conditions. And what the RNLI video doesn't show you is young men getting onto the lifeboat, high-fiving each other, taking selfies, and some, in recent times, even making the signals of some very deeply unpleasant gangs that come from Albania. Between 5 and 10% of the lifeboat crews have left because they just don't want to give up their paid work to go and act, as some of them see it, as a taxi for criminal gangs. It's a very difficult spot that the RNLI find itself in. Before the break, a couple more of your comments. I asked you earlier, is this a Remainer coup? One viewer says, yes, it is, and we now need a third option. You'd get the votes now, Nigel. Thank you. There's so much personal advice coming, it's not true. Sarah says, I did not vote for Truss. I did not vote for Hunt. Our government is in chaos. Bring back Boris, which leads me on beautifully to my guest in a moment on Talking Pints. Alex Story, be one of the leaders of the Bring Back Boris campaign. We'll see in a moment over a drink whether he's still of that view.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, Talking Pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Well, I'm joined by Alex Story, ex-Olympian and former Conservative candidate, one of the leaders of the Bring Back Boris campaign, somebody who's been a member of the Conservative Party for decades. I think, Alex, you probably need a drink after the sort of news that we're getting over the last few days.
I definitely do.
And welcome to the programme. Boris Johnson, elected with a very big majority.
Yeah.
Helped, some might argue, by me and 1 or 2 others. But that's fine.
Yeah.
He got the majority. It was a very simple ticket. It was to get Brexit done.
Yeah.
Now, I had pretty grave reservations about the deal. But in the end, I thought, well, we've pushed this so far that at least if we can reverse the status quo, that's better than nothing. And Boris did all of that. But in the end, and I know you've been an ardent supporter of him, and you've been involved with that campaign with Lord Cruddas and David Campbell Bannerman and others when you wanted him to stay, you wanted him to be reinstated. Isn't the truth of it that he's a very good cheerleader, he's a very good campaigner, but he wasn't a very good governor?
Well, I think he wasn't a great Prime Minister. I think in terms of a Conservative point of view, we all agree that he wasn't really Conservative in any particular way. My reason for wanting Boris back was not to do with his competence as a Prime Minister. It was essentially the principle of what elections and democracy means.
OK, so the country had voted for him.
That's right. And I wanted the people of this country to decide and pass judgment on what he delivered, rather than a small clique of people who were invested in his downfall. And the reason why I was for bringing Boris back was simply because I believe the ballot box to be sacrosanct. And I think the moment you start to tinker with it and allow disgruntled MPs or commentators or special interest groups to interfere with that process, what you have is the dismantling of democracy as we know it. Because what you do is that you're imparting power to the powerful and you're disenfranchising the rest of the country.
Very interesting point of view. No, it is a very interesting point of view. And I'm just sort of thinking, well, actually, Boris went, and look where we are now.
Well, that's the point.
So do you feel justified?
Well, yeah, I mean, I feel like I should be called Alec Cassandra, like the guy who was telling people what the troubles would be. And the question is, the core thing is about legitimacy. In the democratic world in which we live, we bestow on the leader, the political leader of a country, the ability to govern because he won an election process. He went through the process, he campaigned, people gave him their vote, and it's up to the electorate to judge whether the person is competent or not.
Unless he or she breaks the law or...
Well, there are all sorts of ways. I mean, we know that there is a bit of a rigging game going on. I think what we saw is an extraordinary amount of energy being put on this Partygate scandal, so-called scandal. But the reason why I didn't really buy this is because we had a local election in 2022 in May, where the Conservative Party, with Boris at the helm, actually didn't do that badly, given that the Tory Party had been in power for 12 years. And after that, he won a vote of no confidence. And it's because a small group of MPs pushed him and said, we will change the rules to get you out, that he resigned. And that, for me, was the breach of trust. That's when...
Yes, so whether he's a good PM or bad PM, whether he's honest or not particularly honest, whether he partied or not, as far as you're concerned, he should be judged by the British people.
Well, he should be judged by
I completely understand that. I mean, when you hear stories about, virtually fighting going on in the lobby tonight, more resignations, I mean, this lot don't deserve to be in government, do they?
Well, I think what we see now is the true face of the Conservative Party. I think what we now realise is that the Conservative Party, at its core, was command and control centre for the EU. In other words, they were the EU's representatives within the UK. We see this because of the ruthlessness with which all Brexiters are being dealt with. We've come to the point where the establishment, the pro-EU establishment, has decided that they've lost patience with the electorate. Democracy no longer matters for them. And in many ways, if the Labour Party comes in, we will have more of the same. That's the interesting thing, in my view, is that if you're pro-EU, if you're hell-bent on keeping us in a supranational organisation like the EU, the fact that the Labour Party will win is a bonus for you, because it's going to be an acceleration.
It wouldn't be that different, would it, from Jeremy Hunt being in charge?
But this is the point. The point is that actually what we now realise is that, and in fact, if we are critical of the Conservative Party since 2010, we've only had left-leaning policies implemented. We didn't have, quasi-quad.
So you as a, as we said at the start of this discussion, decades you've been in the party, you've stood for them in general elections, you came very, very close.
Yeah.
A couple of thousand votes away from winning a seat in Wakefield. You then would have become an MEP but for the UKIP surge. I'm sorry about that.
No, actually, I did become an MEP, but that's when I realised that the Tory party was completely corrupt because, as you know, I don't know if you remember, it's an indicative story. I was the canary in the coal mine in this kind of loss of patience with Brexiters, because I was called when Tim Kirkhope went to the House of Lords.
That's when you...
Exactly.
Yeah.
I then, the returning officer said, this is now your seat, are you willing and able?
Yeah.
And Tory Party Central just said, we can't have Alex, so we'll put John Proctor. And John Proctor was a non-entity that didn't win any votes.
So you were wiped out by the party, basically.
Exactly, and not just that, I then went to court, and the judge, possibly with an eye to the House of Lords, sided with the party against the electorate.
So you're now done with them?
Well, the point is, I'm a Conservative, but my views are not represented in the Conservative Party.
After all these years?
Well, no, but in fact, if I'm honest, I realised in 2007 and 2006 that the Conservative Party, in particular with Cameron, was drifting very, very far to the left. They brought in, as you might remember, the A-list. In other words, it was chums and people who kind of ticked all the right woke boxes.
People like Liz Truss.
Exactly. People who were actually Lib Dems, and we had an influx of people who had never knocked on a door, who hadn't actually discovered who the people of this country actually were. My greatest discovery when I started door knocking, and this was the thing I really, really liked about politics, was to get to know my people. I realized that all the theories and economic theories or financial theories that I'd learned at university meant zero on the doorstep. And I realized I knew nothing. And the only reason why I became a so-called small C Conservative is because I started in Denton and Reddish, very close to Oldham and south of Manchester. And the more I knocked on doors, the more I realised, and you knew this because UKIP was essentially that kind of reservoir of votes.
Yeah.
These people were not socialists. They were all small C Conservative. They were all patriots. They all wanted the police to be fair. If a crime was committed, the criminal should be arrested and the victim should be protected. All these things are the things that you discover on doorsteps. And my actual optimism for the future is that I know, and we saw that when the Queen passed away, there's an enormous amount of reservoir for...
It's still there, isn't it?
Well, it's not just still there. We saw it overwhelmingly for the 10 days when we had the Queen's passing, all the celebrations around it, the proclamation of a new king. We realised that there is no... or very few Republicans in this country. We know that everybody in this country, most people, are attached to the institutions of this state. It's just that we have a very small number of people who want to change the things.
So what happens now? I mean, you know, I've been arguing for the last 3 days that given this coup that has taken place, and I can't use any other word.
No, it is a coup.
I never thought I'd use that word. I thought that was for conspiracy theorists and people online, and I never thought I'd use it, but I am. And we need something new now, don't we?
Well, the Tory party currently is gone. There is no such thing as a Conservative party. But in many ways, as I was trying to explain, it was gone a long time ago. But it's it's taken...
I think that's right.
The exciting thing is that we, since Brexit, live in an era of revelation. Things have become so much clearer because beforehand, people, the Conservative Party, including people like William Hague, could triangulate, pretend that they were mildly Eurosceptic. And after that,
they weren't.
When it came down to it, they all revealed themselves to be Remainers. They all sided with international versus domestic considerations. And this is where the Conservative Party has chosen to die. That's the...
Well, I think they probably will. And the other Alex story, of course, we must talk about is the athlete, the rower. Now, how tall are you?
I'm 6'8".
6'8". Is that not slightly on the tall and large side for a rower?
No. I mean, that's par for the course.
Is it really?
I'm officially a giant, which is very disappointing for my children's mates, because when I was a kid, I have 4 children, when they were small, I used to say, your dad's officially a giant. So they'd go to school and say, my dad's a giant. And then there'd be a row of children knocking on my door, and they'd go, your dad's you're a liar, your dad's not a giant, he's not green. But, you know, it's completely useless in normal life. But I wouldn't change it for anything else.
And you've got a blue, you're in the Olympics.
Yeah.
Rowing, a very demanding sport.
Well, we used to do 6 to 7 hours a day of training. And,
a day?
Yeah, a day, yeah. And so...
And that as amateurs?
As amateurs, yeah. And so I remember meeting a rugby blue, and he said, a guy called Connor, And he said to me, do you know, when we used to go out at Cambridge, the girls used to say, where are the rowing blues? And the girls and the rugby guys used to say, well, they're not here. Because we're the warrior monks of sports. You know, we train very early in the morning, we train in the afternoon, we go to bed before 10. And so, of course, we always see the girls at their best. The rugby players see them in a much more...
Yeah. And British rowing had a wonderful couple of decades.
Yeah. Well, very few people have gone through the hardship of rowing, but to make it even worse, we had an East German called Jürgen Grobler, whose English was relatively strained, but who made us work a great deal. I mean, you know from Steve Redgrave, Matthew Pinson, and all these guys, we worked extremely hard, and in a sense, we always did it just because of the glory of potentially winning that gold medal. It wasn't pay, it wasn't anything else, but it was one of these things that I did.
So the real Olympic ideal.
Yeah, it's the only sport where there's no money. Unfortunately, it's being attacked by gender politics at the moment. There was a decision 2 weeks ago for men to compete against women, and I think that's completely outrageous. But you know, this is the kind of world we live in, and at some stage. And it's in our politics as well. How is it that we've come to a point when somebody who's 6'8", who at the age of nearly 50 could take on the ladies' Olympic? I mean, it's completely insane. It's completely
ridiculous. Well, let's hope rowing manages to stay free of some of that. And I've no doubt you're going to continue on your political journey and maybe find a home in the end. And Alex, thank you.
My pleasure.
And thanks for explaining what that Bring Back Boris campaign was all about. I find that really interesting.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much indeed for coming. We've got a couple of minutes left. It's time for Barrage the Farage. You have sent in your questions. Let's see what you've got for me today. Tom asks, if Keir Starmer becomes Prime Minister, what will the state of Britain look like after 5 years of Labour government? Pretty much identical, I would have thought, to 5 years of Conservative government. I mean, what is Starmer going to do? Make the English Channel situation worse? I doubt it. Put up taxes more than the Tories? I really rather doubt it. Take us back closer to European Union regulations? Well, maybe, but the Conservatives have got rid of precious few of them. The differences now between the parties, frankly, are not that great. Mary says, I think Starmer and his cronies are hopeless. Do you think he'd be a good PM? Look, he hasn't got any personality. I don't think he has any really strong fundamental beliefs. But frankly, if he was able to lead the country without his own MPs fighting each other in the lobby, it might not look too bad. Alex, would Starmer, I mean, forget the policies, do you think Starmer would look good on the world stage as our PM?
Well, it depends what you think, but what you mean by that. If you think, is he going to fit in with the international elite? Absolutely.
He will.
And in that sense...
But could you define what a woman is?
Well, that's the issue. If you can't do that, then actually what are you on about? What do you stand for?
They would be worse than the Conservatives, but not much. Mike asks, are the ex-RAF pilots who have betrayed the country for Chinese money committing treason? What would you do about them? Well, treason is a very big, strong word. But I have to say, I am disgusted, appalled that 30 of them would do this. But you know what? They weren't offered 25,000. They were offered $250,000. If at some point in time we finish up fighting against Chinese fighter jets, then they will have committed acts against this country. And finally tonight, Kevin asks, is Brexit doomed? Well, many, many politicians would like Brexit to be doomed. But I have to tell you, there is absolutely no way we're reversing this in terms of membership of the Union. The real worry is we finish up with Brexit in name only. That's what Jeremy Hunt wants. That's what Keir Starmer wants. That's why we need now a genuine political revolution. Tomorrow night, I'll be live with you from 7 till 8, following Michelle, who's on from 6 to 7. We'll have a live audience in Deal in Kent. But now I'm going to hand you over to Mark Stein.
Yeah, I think you are right about that, Nigel. Terrific show, but a Brexit in name only is what we are headed for. They're not going to have us back in that European Union, but they think they can turn us into basically the equivalent of some ramshackle protectorate of Brussels. It's a serious night for politics. It is a political coup. It's basically rendering democracy a laughingstock and the great offices of state a laughingstock. We're going to talk about all of that and a lot more in the hour ahead. It's all coming up right after the weather.
Good evening, I'm Alex Deakin with your latest weather update. Tomorrow we switch things around a bit. It should be a brighter day across the west where we've seen a fair bit of rain today, and we'll see more rain across the eastern areas. Still, it's going to be mild. Tomorrow, though, it won't be as windy as today. The isobars squeezing together. It's been very blustery across north and west Wales. Gusty winds too for Northern Ireland, where we've also seen some very heavy rain, and still further pulses of heavy rain to come tonight across Northern Ireland. May turn drier for a time before more rain spreads north. Same goes for northern parts of Wales. Further rain to come here, and that'll spread into northwest England and parts of southern Scotland by the morning time. Further south, it generally turns dry, but quite misty, quite murky, and very mild. Temperatures staying in double digits across the board. Fairly grey start then to come on Thursday morning. A lot of clouds, some misty conditions as well. Now it should brighten up for Northern Ireland and Wales and southwest England, so a cheerier day compared